Today is July 20th, 2022, and we have an agenda that includes some very important reports on what actions taken on our prior audits, a report on legislative action taken on state auditor I-900 performance audits, introduction of new staff, and review of the 2023 recommendations in review of tax preferences. There are 4 that we will be reviewing today: lodging tax, the commute trip reduction, food processors, nonprofit hospitals, historic automobile museums, for recommendations for 2023. We will have a report, I should have said, on the lodging tax expenditures separately, and how Washington compares is a briefing report we'll have at 10:30. We're going to start today with a roll call, and then we have an announcement from our legislative auditor and some response on behalf of the executive committee. So with that, can we please start the roll call to make sure we have everyone officially on record of who is attending?
Yes, this is a roll call for the attendance of the July 20th, 2022 JLARC meeting. Representative Berg.
Representative Berg is excused today.
Representative Fye.
President Fye is present.
Representative Frame. Representative Gaynor.
Present.
Senator Hasagawa. Representative Hahn. Senator Lovelet.
Present.
Senator Mullet, I believe, is out. Representative Orcutt.
Present.
Representative Paulette.
Representative Paulette is here.
Senator Rivers. Senator Saldana.
Present.
Senator Short.
I'm present.
Representative Stokesbury.
Present.
Senator Wegener. Senator Wilson.
Here.
We have 9 in attendance, and we need 9 for a quorum, so a quorum has been reached.
Whew. I was worried there for a minute. Thought we'd all have to get out our cell phones and call some other members. Thank you all for attending today. And before we begin with our other business, I'd like to turn it over to Keenan Kanapaski, our highly esteemed legislative auditor.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's great and wonderful to see all the members here this morning. As I know many of you have seen in a recent message I sent to you, that I want to announce that I will be retiring in January. And I just did want to take a moment to extend my appreciation to the committee. It's been a genuine honor to serve you and the entire legislature in this position I've had. I had the pleasure of doing it for nearly 12 years now, and I have loved every minute of it. And it's really a difficult decision to step away from a job that is so fulfilling and important. And I really hope has helped all of you in the difficult roles you have as elected representatives of our state. So I am leaving in a very happy state, although it's a little bittersweet to leave a job you love really this much. And, the personal desire to spend some more time with my very wide-ranging family that extends from age 7 up to 82 is really an important point for my decision to leave. But it's as I said, it's just been an honor, and I really appreciate all of the support and the attention that you provide to the audit function in your role to improve services for the public. It won't be till January, so you're not quite rid of me yet. And we have a lot of work to do through the end of the year that I'll be helping finish off and bring to you. And of course, one of the most critical things you will need to be deliberating on, that I think Mr. Pollitt would provide some thoughts on for proceeding, is finding who the next legislative auditor that you want to serve in this capacity going forward. But with that, thank you so much. And I look forward to still doing a lot of important work over the next few months.
I want to start by saying, as chair, people know we rotate the chair position. And when Keenan informed the executive committee of his decision, I was a bit shell-shocked and was like, oh my gosh, as chair, this is something no chair in recent years has expected to happen, or future chairs expect to happen, because Keenan is both incredibly esteemed in our state and nationally as legislative auditor, and I know held in such high regard by every member of this committee and the legislature. So I was shocked, and I couldn't imagine the Joint Legislative Audit Review Committee and our work without Keenan as legislative auditor. I've been on the committee most of my 11 years in the legislature, and of course, Keenan has been the legislative auditor all of that time. It's not that I can't imagine someone else being auditor. It's that I know from the national auditors, from the respect given to the work by fellow legislators, by the respect given the audit reviews, by the news media, and by researchers, that he has built an institution that is extremely respected, and his shoes will be very hard to fill. Because he has built an institution that is so well respected, he has built that with a staff that is incredibly highly respected and has, I know, the confidence of all of us. And I'm eager to encourage current staff members, especially the senior members, to apply for this position. The executive committee, Senator Mullet, who is unable to join us today, Representative Orcutt and Senator Wilson, and I have spent a good number of hours in discussion about process. And we recognize that there are some incredible opportunities for leadership from within the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee. We also recognize that there's going to be strong national interest in this position because of the work of our current staff and Keenan. And what we are proposing, and I should say the executive committee under the statute is charged with determining a hiring process and making a recommendation to you, the full committee, for a new legislative auditor. And so taking that responsibility on We have held numerous discussions. We have asked for the advice and input and support from the Secretary of the Senate and Clerk of the House, and the gracious and generous gift of time from Directors of Senate Committee Services and Office of Program Research to assist us in determining, and the Human Relations Directors in determining, getting some input from staff for an interview process and criteria, but also to help us in screening applications. And we expect to have a post of a job application due out on July 29th. But what we are not going to do, because we don't feel there is a need for this, is to like hire a national search team, because we think that the circles that we would be drawing from are going to be well aware of this opening and the posting. We are, as I said, very eager as well to encourage people who are on the staff to apply, and working with the team from committee services, OPR, HR directors, we expect to pull together a screening process, and for the directors to give 4 to 6 recommendations from screened resumes based on criteria from the executive committee to the executive committee for interviews. I expect this will be a very transparent process. We will share the proposed criteria and weighting with the full committee for your input to us, and our timeline such that we hope to, we'll be busy, the executive committee, but we hope to have a proposed recommendation for hiring at the October meeting, which we're going to propose. Right now it's slated for October 12th. There is a national meeting on October 12th where many of the potential candidates and our own auditor will be. And so we're going to propose looking at dates the following week, and Tuesday or Wednesday of the following week. So just as an alert. So our hope would be that we would have a recommended candidate for you October 18th or 19th for the full committee. I'd like to ask if Senator Wilson and then Representative Orcutt, as members of the executive committee, would like to add anything.
Well, thank you, Representative Paulette. I just you've pretty much covered most of the bases, but I did want to say thank you for all the years of service that Keenan has given us, and it has been a pleasure. That I've been on the JLARC committee now for several years, can't remember how many, but I've thoroughly enjoyed working with you, and as you said, Jerry, that it will be big shoes to fill when we do the hiring. So, but I wish you well in your endeavors, and have fun with your family.
Representative Orcutt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it's going to be a little repetitive here over the next few months, because we're going to talk about how great a job that Keenan has done while we talk about this today. But let's remember, he's going to be around through the end of the year. So we're disappointed that we're going to lose Keenan, but we're pleased that he's staying around for at least through the end of the year. And he has done such a tremendous job. I've been on JLARC for, I don't know, 10, 12 years or so now. Keenan, I've been working with him that long. So really appreciate all of the work that he's done, the professionalism with which he's done it, the care that he's used in selecting employees in JLARC. Very thoughtful, very careful, understanding the importance and the technical nature of auditing. And so it is going to be very difficult to replace Keenan. Even doing a nationwide search, I question whether there's going to be a large pool of individuals applying. But I do want to reassure folks that, some of the members of the Executive Council have gone through this before on other councils that we serve on. I know on the Economic and Revenue Forecast Council, I've twice been through this. And I know Senator Mullet has talked about having gone through it too. So that's what we're drawing off of. We're drawing off a little bit of experience in hiring when we're deciding how we're going to move forward. We're fortunate that we've got HR departments in the House and the Senate now that we didn't have back then that will help us in this whole process. So I think we do have a good process to move forward. I think it's one that is going to stand up to any potential scrutiny there may be for the process that we go through to replace Keenan, but it will be a difficult task to replace Keenan and to make sure that we've got somebody there that's going to maintain the integrity and the reputation that JLARC has, not only in this state, not only with the legislative folks, but throughout the nation. It is very well known, and JLARC has received a number of awards, and it's because of Keenan's leadership. And we want to make sure that we continue that with whoever we find as a replacement, but it will not be an easy task. So Keenan, we're going to thank you again later in the year, but I do want to say thank you now. Disappointed that you're leaving, but we totally understand if that's the right move for you. We congratulate you on that move and wish you the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Orcutt. Are there any questions or comments from other members of the committee? And not seeing any. If I'm missing a hand up, I'm trying not to also have the participant list up at the same time I've got your pictures and the agenda up. So please just speak up if I miss your hand, okay? With that, we have 5 new staff members to be introduced by Keenan. So this is kind of a joyful occasion at the same time. So please, Keenan, would you introduce our new staff members to us?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you and Representative Orcutt and Senator Wilson for your kind words. Very much appreciate them. It is kind of an interesting segue to the next topic, because I know all 3 of the executive committee members present talked about the excellent staff that we have at JLARC, and it probably is one of my proudest accomplishments is the quality of the people that we've brought in to help you out here. And so I'm really pleased to introduce 5 new staff members to you. And since we hadn't met as a group since last January, we've brought some more people on board. And I don't really have time to regale all of their background and qualifications because we got a full committee meeting, but I did want to make sure I give you an opportunity to connect faces. So as I read their names off, hopefully they'll be able to turn on their video and you can see them and they wave to you. Aline Maisonnet, Stephanie Sato, Ashley Trunell, Zane Potter, and Jill Satrin. There's Zane, and there's Jill. And these are going to, I'm super happy to have the 5 of them join the team here. It's going to be an excellent group of additional professionals to help you out. It's a great range of experiences and backgrounds, a lot of knowledge of public administration, law, political science, economics. It's a wonderful panoply of skills. They will look forward to working with you in the coming months and years.
Welcome to all of you, and we appreciate your willingness to serve with us and look forward to your collaborating with you on your work. With that, our first action item, since we have a quorum, is always the most important item of business, approval of the minutes from the January 4th meeting. I know that not much has happened in since January 4th. So you all recall the meeting perfectly. And can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Move to approve.
And a second?
Second.
Rep. Orcutt and Senator Wilson have moved and seconded. All in favor, please say your name and I. Paulette, I.
Representative Orcutt votes aye.
Wilson, aye.
I vote aye.
Senator Short votes
Anya.
aye. Loveland, aye.
Tewksbury, aye.
Thank you. Are there any nays? Any abstentions? The minutes are approved. Thank you. Now we will begin our first report of the day. Ashley Elliott will be presenting on the annual report on lodging tax expenditures. And I assume we're going to share screen and have the presentation. Welcome, Ashley. Take it
Good
away.
morning. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Ashley Elliott, staff to the committee, and I am here this morning to present the update to JLARC's lodging tax expenditures report. This report does exclude King County and any county that exceeds 1.5 million residents. And just as a note, this is a ongoing data collection process. It is not an audit or an evaluation, which is different than the rest of the reports you will see today. Sorry, so municipalities, meaning cities, states, cities, towns, and county governments have been required to report lodging tax expenditures to JLARC since 2013. Municipalities may collect a lodging tax for stays at hotels, motels, and other similar facilities. Lodging tax was first introduced in King County in 1967, and over time, allowable expenditures have been expanded to include all tourism-related activities. In 2007, the legislature clarified the types of activities that could be funded by lodging tax revenue. And in 2013, the legislature required municipalities to report information about their expenditures to JLARC. Municipalities may distribute funds locally, and they report this expenditure data to JLARC. Municipalities may use lodging tax revenue to fund tourism-related activities, such as events and festivals, marketing and promotion, and tourism-related facilities expenses. They may also distribute grants to local organizations for these activities. Statute requires municipalities to report expenditure data to JLARC, and JLARC provides guidance to municipalities about the data reporting process, but we were not directed to verify or evaluate the data that is reported to us. And in 2021, 188 municipalities reported spending about $51 million in lodging tax revenue, and this paid for 1,206 tourism-related activities. Municipalities reported that 58 million people attended these activities and paid for 11.9 million lodging nights. And 96% of the municipalities that received a lodging tax distribution in 2021 reported to JLARC. And just for comparison, here are 2020's numbers. And we would like to thank the Association of Washington Cities and the Washington State Association of Counties for their help with outreach to municipalities. And in just a moment, I'm going to go ahead and open up our report, which is interactive, to walk through some of the data and just give a demonstration on how to use that. I'm going to be walking through our activity specific data tab. This just is one of the examples, simply because it has a lot of the data is the most expanded in this example. The municipal summary and the statewide summary are more rolled up. So I just wanted to show an example where there's more detail provided. In this statewide summary, also you will see data, some graphs here that have information all the way back to 2014, which is the first year that JLARC collected this data. There's also more of this 2014 data available in this data tab. So under our activity specific data here, I'm just going to click the dashboard. These dashboards are laid out similarly with the view up here, view title in the left-hand corner. We have our filters over here. So the year, the activity type, the municipality, and if the event was affected by COVID-19. For this particular one, I'm just going to select 2001, so we could just look at 2001's data. And if I wanted to look at just event, event, festival, facility, and marketing, I could do that as well. I could look at a specific municipality. And if the event was affected by COVID-19, that's only an option for 2020 and 2021. And then I can see the municipality and all of the detail that they might have entered. As you might notice there's some of these yellow boxes here. Those are fields that were left blank by the municipality. These interactive dashboards don't have explanations for those. If there is an explanation, it's under data, download the data. This complete data set right here is an Excel document that has all of the data that's been reported to us by the municipalities since 2014, so it's rather large. And if there is any sort of explanation that was left by the municipality, it will be in that document. So I will be back next July to present another update, as this is an annual requirement. That concludes my prepared remarks, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you for your annual report. Representative Gaynor.
Thank you for your report, Ashley. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious about the lodging nights. When you, on one of the first slides there, you had the total lodging nights. Are those the projected nights from the activities that are funded, or are those actual stays that total stays throughout the state?
Those are the reported stays. Sorry, let me grab the actual, we have an actual definition for it, and I unfortunately don't have it memorized. But it is, I apologize, hold on just one second.
But if I could clarify, Representative, as Ashley's looking at, if I can, Representative Paulette.
Oh, please.
I think Representative Gaynor, you're trying to see, are these just stays related to the activities funded by lodging taxes, not stays for all purposes, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and these are definitely related to the use activities that were funded with the funds.
But if I may, then when they fill out to make an application to the local lodging tax committee, I mean, they project, and like I saw the Aberdeen Founders Day, they projected 200 stays. So the totals that you have are the projected stays, and we really don't know that they actually had the 200, but that was what they projected. Is that correct?
Yeah, so they are required to enter a predicted and then an actual for each event. And so the total, that 11 million is the total number of actual stays. So again, it is I mean, it's their best estimate on whether or not the event actually generated that much lodging nights. So it is still, I can't guarantee that it's like perfectly correct, like they went around and asked everyone, but yes, there is like a predicted, and then we do ask for an actual account. So the totals that we provide are the actual counts that they're giving us versus the predicted counts. So we do try and separate them when we're providing like summary information, but they are required to provide both numbers for us.
Thank you.
Or we ask for both numbers, I guess is a better way to say it.
Anyone else have a question? Okay. Not seeing any other questions. In which case we will proceed with our next agenda item. Thank you very much, Ashley. Which is the report on how Washington compares. And again, Ashley, welcome to presentation. You haven't gone away.
I have not. So good morning yet again, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I am still Ashley Elliott, and I am going to present another annual update to how Washington compares. This is a report we do at the behest of the executive committee, and it is also not an audit. It is just a briefing report that is a compilation of different measures. So to provide a little bit of background, this is a compilation of measures from national data sets that shows how Washington compares to other states. And its intent is to make these public data sources more accessible and interactive to the public. We have 35 measures in this report, and we've categorized them into 5 broad categories: population, economy, health, and environment, taxes and revenue, government spending and debt, education costs and spending, and public assistance, transportation, and public safety spending. And all of this data is available in interactive dashboards, which I'm also going to open up in a moment and walk you through one of. But if you didn't want to look at all those different dashboards and you just wanted to see an overview of Washington, we have this wonderful one-page summary here. This is just a screenshot, but it's printable, and it goes through all 35 measures. It tells you where Washington ranks out of 50. It tells you the measure. So in this instance, I'm just population, and it tells you the trend, if that's an increase or a decrease, or it remained unchanged from the previous year. One note about the one-year trends is they're based on the measure. So it would be like if the population increased or decreased, it's not based on the rank. So the rank is kind of just there for your information, but the trend is based on the measure itself. So I'm going to go ahead and open up one of the, oh, that's not the report. There we go. So that one page overview I was talking about is right here on this homepage if you wanted to go ahead and open it to print. And then again, across the top is all 5 of those categories I mentioned, as well as our sources if you were interested in seeing where we got all of this data from. I'm going to go ahead and go to our population dashboard. In the top left of all of these dashboards, because they're all laid out the same, you're going to find the title of the measure and then the year of the measure. In this instance, it's calendar year 2021. There is a table here with all 50 states and the measure and the rank. So in this instance, California is the top in terms of population, and you do have to scroll because there are all 50 here. And so you can select from either the table or the map. I'm going to go to the map here and select Washington, and it's going to bring up a 5-year trend line. So you can see how population has changed over the last 5 years in Washington. If you wanted to hover over the state, again, you can see the rank, the measure, and if that's an increase or decrease. I can do the same thing over here where it's highlighted on the table. And if I click to a different state, it's going to change that trend line and highlight it over here as well. If I didn't want to see a trend line anymore and I clicked on the state, that trend line is going to go away. And those are the same for every one of the dashboards. They're all laid out the same and they all function the same. We try and do this every year to kind of just keep it updated for you guys. And I am happy to try and answer any questions.
Ashley, to clarify something for folks, would you bring up the infant mortality
Oh, yes.
tableau for me?
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry, I have to.
so it shows us as 46th in the nation,
Yes.
and someone who teaches public health, I was shocked, and then looked at how it's presented. And in fact, we're 4th in the nation in terms of, if you look at it from perspective of the lowest infant mortality, or in terms of desirable result. And I just want to make sure people understand that when you look at this data on some of the key indicators for health, for example, that you can look at it as your 46th, or you can look at it as your 4th best in the nation in terms of infant mortality. We're not 46th and nearly the worst in infant mortality. So
yes, that's where the rank is very subjective. So that's why we don't really say very much about the rank. And in terms of that 1-year trend, it's kind of better to look at the measure itself, that rather than the rank, to see what you think is important in that. But yes.
It may be that we may need to just do a little clarifying note for people, because I think, like when we talk about tax issues, we often talk about Washington, or in higher ed, college going rates, we're the 48th in the nation or 46th in the nation, and we expect that to be like, that is because we're at the bottom, not the top. So we just might want to make a note for people.
Yes.
Okay, Senator Short.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wondering, and it maybe has COVID, changed any of these trends? I know that this is an update, and so maybe we won't get to see that yet. But I'm just kind of curious, especially in the health aspect.
So far, I believe our health data is still a little bit behind COVID. I think 2019 is most of the health data. You can kind of start to see some of it in, I believe some of the unemployment data is starting to be 2020. So you can kind of start to see it in some of that. But a lot of this data is US Census data. So it's still like right on the cusp of the beginning of that time. So it's not all consistent across the board of the year. That's why we do have the year in there. So you're just starting to see in some of the measures, some bits of that. But I can get you those exact measures that are 2020, where you can kind of start to see some of it.
Senator Saldana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think on the one pager, I just have a question under taxes and revenue, and maybe I'm just not reading it correctly. But the third line and the last line look like they're the same thing that they're measuring, but they are two. One has it that we're on a 1-year trend decrease, and the other has an increase. I just want to make sure I'm reading it correctly, or if what the distinguishing factor is there.
The personal income per capita and then the,
It's the state and local revenue as a percent of personal income. Yeah. And then the state
sorry.
and local taxes as a percent of personal income. That's how I'm reading those lines.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have to move my,
No problem. One has it as 23, ranked 23, and then the other is 25.
yes. I have to double check. I'm sorry. But I will double check. They are different, but there's so many.
I think I can jump in and
Okay,
clarify,
I'll let-
Senator. What one is revenues and one is taxes. So revenues would be including fees and other sources like that.
Does that clarify?
Yes,
there-
it does. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Anyone else? I want to make sure I'm not missing any hands here. Ashley, in addition to the JLARC website, I mean, I view this as like a really incredibly helpful tool for policy. Is this posted anywhere else on the legislative website or otherwise?
I'm not sure about the actual website. These dashboards are available on Tableau Public, so people that are looking on Tableau Public can find them. But we haven't explored making it available on other places on the legislative website, but I'm sure we could find other places to put it if people would find that valuable as well.
Anyone else have other thoughts about use of this to make it more broadly available and used for legislative policy purposes? I don't know if maybe LEAP, maybe having it on the LEAP website might be something we might explore. Okay. If there are no other questions or thoughts, let's get to our next item. Thank you very much, Ashley. And again, I think this is just an incredibly valuable tool for policy and encourage committee members to point to it for other legislators and staff to use. So our next report dives into the tax preference reviews. And so we have a team presenting the preliminary report on the tax preference reviews.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Eric Thomas, staff to JLARC. With me are my colleagues, Zach Freeman, Dana Lynn, and Pete Van Morsel. And we're presenting JLARC's 2022 tax preference performance reviews, in which 5 of the 7 legislative auditor recommendations require action. JLARC's tax reviews follow the same audit standards as the rest of our work, but there is a different process for the tax preference performance reviews. That's primarily due to the involvement of the Citizen Commission for the Performance Measurement of Tax Preferences. This is a 5-member body created by the legislature that has appointees from each of the 4 caucuses, as well as the governor's office, and is responsible for determining the staff's 10-year review schedule. So figuring out which preferences will be reviewed and then sequencing that work over the 10 years. And the considerations they consider in doing so are industry groupings, expiration dates, and legislative direction. And in addition, after hearing the staff reports, the Citizen Commission takes public testimony on the staff reports, and based on that testimony, adopt comments that are then presented to the legislature that accompany the staff reports in December. Statute directs JLARC to address 5 key areas in the tax preference performance reviews. Chief among those is the public policy objective being achieved. Second is, who are the beneficiaries and what are their savings? Third, what are the revenue and economic impacts to taxpayers and to the government? Fourth, looking at other states, do other states have a similar tax preference? And fifth, again, unlike JLARC's other work, we are specifically required to make a recommendation to the legislature to either continue, modify, or terminate a tax preference review. And I did want to note that this will be the last set of tax preference performance reviews that you'll hear that do not have the racial equity analysis that's required by a 5405. That process that we came up with to conduct those reviews was put in place after these had started. So this is the last set that will not have those. In this year, the legislative auditor recommends action on 5 of the preferences. And 2 of the preferences do not require legislative action. And again, just want to remind you that all these reports include 1-page overviews and also 2 to 3 minute video summaries that have the key findings and recommendations for each of these reviews. With that, I will hand it over to my colleague, Pete Van Morsel.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Pete Van Morsel, staff to JLARC, and I'm here today with my colleague, Zach Freeman, and we'll talk about the first preference for the day, which is a B&O tax and a public utility tax credit for commute trip reduction incentives. This is a preference that's scheduled to expire July 1st, 2024, with estimated savings in the biennium of $4.1 million. The legislative auditor concludes that while more Washingtonians are using commute alternatives, fewer employers are requesting a tax credit, and the credit likely has limited influence on the amount of financial incentives that employers provide their employees. This preference provides a credit against an employer's B&O tax or public utility tax liability for up to 50% of the financial incentives that are provided to employees to use commute alternatives. And the credit may be claimed for incentives that incent ride sharing, public transportation, car sharing programs, and non-motorized commuting, such as walking or bicycling. And telework is not among the qualifying commute alternatives for which the credit may be claimed. The credit is subject to several annual limits, the first of which is that claims may not exceed $60 per employee per year, $100,000 per employer per year, and statewide credit allocations may not exceed $2.75 million. And if the total credit requests that the Department of Revenue receives in a given year exceed that state total, the department has to reduce each request by the same percentage to stay under the cap. The legislature stated 2 objectives for the preference, and the first of these is to increase the share of Washingtonians that use commute alternatives, that is, that commute to work by a means other than driving alone. Further, the legislative auditor is directed to recommend continuing the preference if JLARC's review finds that this objective is met. To evaluate this objective, we looked at the American Community Survey Program of the U.S. Census, and its data on the means of commuting to work shows that the objective is in fact met, as more Washington commuters are using commute alternatives, with a 1.7 percentage point increase from 2015 to 2019. And Washington's use of commute alternatives consistently exceeds the national average by between 4 and 5 percentage points. The second stated objective is to reduce traffic congestion, energy use, and air pollution through employer-sponsored commute trip reduction programs. And to evaluate this objective, JLARC staff were directed to use WashDOT's commute trip reduction program survey data. And what this data means, employers in certain urban growth areas that meet specific employment criteria must develop CTR programs. And their employees are asked to complete surveys every 2 years about the way that they commute to work. The map on this slide shows the counties and jurisdictions where CTR sites are located. By clicking on the same image in section 4 of the web report, you can view an interactive dashboard that provides characteristics of participating employers aggregated to the state, county, and jurisdictional levels. The data in this data set represents between 800 and 1,000 commute trip reduction work sites and between 500 and 600,000 employees. The businesses that claim the credit make up 30% of commute trip reduction work sites. And because they tend to be larger employers, they also represent more than half of the employees in the data. The data also shows that King County is home to a majority of both commute trip reduction work sites. And again, these are tending to be larger employers, therefore 65% of the employees. We analyzed this survey data to show that employees at commute trip reduction work sites use commute alternatives at a higher rate than at the state average, and increasingly so. So this graph for 3 survey cycles shows that the use of commute alternatives grew in each survey cycle, particularly in 2019-20, which includes the first effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. We also used the CTR survey data, as well as guidance issued by WashDOT, to estimate state average levels of the annual per employee vehicle miles traveled, fuel consumption, and greenhouse gas emissions. The increase in the use of commute alternatives that was shown on the graph on the left translates into improvements in each measure. Between 2015-16 and 2017-18, the per employee vehicle miles traveled declined by an average of 320 miles per employee per year. Associated fuel consumption, based on an average fuel economy level, declined by 15 gallons per year. And greenhouse gas emissions attributed to that fuel consumption declined by 0.13 metric tons of CO2 equivalent per year. Next, Zach will discuss trends in the requests for the credit.
Thank you, Pete. Employers must apply for the credit each year. Applications are due in January for incentives paid in the year prior. JLARC staff analysis of credit application data found that the number of employers applying for the credit fell from 669 in 2016 to 297 in 2020, a 56% decline. This decline was concentrated among smaller employers whose applications fell 64% over that same period. Applications have continued to fall during the COVID-19 pandemic, as shown here in years 2021 and 2022. Despite declining applications, the number of employees receiving incentives has remained relatively stable, though this trend did reverse in 2022, due in part to the COVID-19 pandemic. JLARC staff found that the credit likely has limited influence on employer-provided incentives. While the credit nominally reimburses up to half of the incentive value, in practice, statutory caps reduced the reimbursement rate to less than 50%. From 2016 to 2022, small employers were awarded an average of 1.8 million in tax credits per year, and they received on average about 30% of that back in incentives, or that was equal to 30% of total incentives paid. The reduced reimbursement rate for small employers comes from DOR prorating credit claims to fit under the 2.75 million statewide cap. The reimbursement rate for large employers is even lower. Due to their size, these employers are subject to the $100,000 per employer credit cap, and as a result, they recoup just 6% of incentives paid through the credit. The decline in credit applications, particularly among the smaller employers that receive a relatively higher reimbursement rate, suggests the credit likely has limited influence on employer decision-making. Using data from King County Metro's ORCA Business Passport program, JLARC staff found that employers provide financial incentives beyond what they report on their credit applications. The ORCA Business Passport program is a comprehensive annual transportation pass program for employers in the greater Puget Sound area. JLARC staff reviewed employer contract data for 455 employers with between 5 and 500 employees. We found that on average, these employers spent $383 per employee per year on transit passes in 2020. This is significantly higher than the maximum credit reimbursement rate of $60 per employee. And despite having eligible expenditures, just 35 of the 455 employers, or 7%, applied for the credit in the following year. Additionally, we found that the large employers in the program spent a combined $53 million on transit passes in 2019. Employers spending beyond what can be reimbursed by the credit suggests employers have other reasons for offering transit incentives. JLARC staff found that employers offer incentives for a number of different reasons, including employee recruitment and retention, sustainability and traffic demand management. Many employers use incentives to promote corporate sustainability, while others do so to mitigate traffic in and around their campuses. The University of Washington, for example, is required to limit the number of vehicles on its campus through an agreement with the City of Seattle. Local mandates also come into play. The City of Seattle, for example, recently modified its CTR law to require work sites with 100 or more employees to provide financial incentives for commute alternatives. The legislative auditor recommends the legislature continue and modify the preference. The legislature should continue the preference because more Washingtonians are using commute alternatives. The legislature should modify the preference because its influence is likely limited. Modifications might include amending it to further incentivize use of commute alternatives, or recategorizing it as one intended to provide tax relief. This concludes our prepared remarks, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions? Anyone's... Oh, I'm sorry, I'm breaking in and out. Representative Fye.
Thank you, Chair Paulette. My question relates to whether staff had a chance to talk with the employers as to whether the program was beneficial to them, or is it just based on the survey results? Or whether what modifications employers might think would move the needle.
Thank you for that question, Representative. No, we didn't ask what modifications might benefit the employers, and our contact with the employers was limited to a survey in terms of their responsiveness to the existing credit.
And could I interject something on that point, Representative Paulette?
Please.
To just point out an opportunity to potentially get some of that input, Representative Fye, would be the Citizen Commission does a public testimony process. So we're hoping folks may take advantage of that to provide their thoughts through that mechanism.
Any follow-up or further questions? Senator Saldana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do believe WSDOT staff is here as well, so I wasn't sure if they were going to give some initial comments, or but I know that one of the recommendations was to talk with WSDOT as we're thinking about how we might refine.
And could I have a comment there, Representative Paulette, before you decide how you'd like to go? Just a caution, Senator Saldana, that of course, we're early in the process and we haven't quite solicited official comments from departments yet. So I don't want to preclude you obviously from asking them stuff, but they may not be at the stage yet where they've run those thoughts through their organization to be an official position.
But this would be an appropriate time if you have questions or if WSDOT would like to respond.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee and staff. My name is Brian Lagerberg. I'm the chair or the director of the Public Transportation Division at WSDOT and the former chair of the CTR task force. I was involved in the original research that went into the 1995 bill that created the tax credit. And just one point I think is important is one of the original intents of the tax credit was to engage smaller workers in programs like CTR without having the mandatory aspects. And so as to reduce the administrative burden for small employers engaging with their employees to create commute programs. I think over time, and I think you heard just a moment ago that the smaller employers are less engaged today than they were. That was a major purpose of the program initially. We still support the Community Production Board in its work, and I would encourage committee staff to work with the board on both getting information from employers, but also working with the board on ideas to improve the credit. I would point out that the credit has been modified, according to my memory, at least 3 separate times over the course of the credit. And really, each of those amendments were focused on improving the program and or the effect of the program, and continue to engage smaller work sites in the program. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any follow-up or further questions for Mr. Lagerberg? Any other questions about this preference and the analysis? Not seeing anyone else's hand. So with that, we will let's move to the review of food processors. And I am channeling Representative Orcutt here and saying that the food processor review is a blended effort. I must have been all chopped up there because there was no laughing.
I won't whine about that, Representative.
You minced your words too much, Mr. Chair.
There we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Dana Lynn, staff with your committee, and I'm joined this morning by my colleague, Pete Van Morsel. We're here to talk to you about our review of a set of tax preferences provided for different food processors in the state. We have a legislative auditor conclusion that noted that dairy and fruit and vegetable beneficiaries had job and wage increases that exceeded industry and state averages. Those seafood beneficiaries saw a decline in both. And although the preferences reduced taxes, they remain higher than in other states. The tax exemptions that are currently in effect are all scheduled to expire by July 1st, 2025. Most of those B&O tax exemptions will be replaced by B&O tax preferential rates after that time. And the estimated beneficiary savings in the upcoming biennium for dairy processors is $10.5 million. For fruit and vegetable processors, $22.7 million. And for seafood processors, nearly $5 million. We'll give you a little bit of a lay of the land here because we have a few different portions of our presentation this morning. First, we'll talk about the tax preferences that we studied, who they apply to, and types of activities that qualify for these preferences. Then we'll talk about our analysis of job and wage impacts in the 3 industries that are impacted by these preferences. And finally, Pete will talk about a comparative effective tax rate analysis that we have contracted to produce. So first, we'll talk about the B&O tax preferences. There are currently B&O tax exemptions in place for processors of dairy products, fruit and vegetables, and by definition, that includes wineries, and seafood products. These particular exemptions took effect in 2005 and 2006, and the legislature has extended them as a group in 2012 and most recently in 2015. They apply to a couple of different types of activities. First, manufacturing of products, such as yogurt and cheese by dairy processors, frozen French fries, fruit juice or fortified fruit juice by fruit and vegetable processors, and frozen fish fillets or canned salmon by seafood processors. They also apply to sales of these products that are made by the manufacturer when the product is delivered in-state to a buyer who then transports the items outside the state. For seafood products, that sale exemption is a little more broad. It also applies to retail sales, and it applies to sales made by sellers other than the manufacturer as well. There is, in addition, a targeted B&O tax exemption that we included in our analysis, and that was provided in 2013 specifically for wholesale sales by manufacturers of dairy products that are then used to produce or become an ingredient in other dairy products. This includes items such as powdered whey or infant formula. So when the exemptions that we just covered expire in 2025, 3 of them will be replaced by preferential B&O tax rates, and 1 will return to a general B&O tax rate. And just to illustrate that, for the dairy processors, they are currently receiving a full exemption that will expire July 1st, 2025, and they will move to a preferential 0.138% tax rate, which they will pay until January 1st of 2036, when current law provides that they will then move to the regular wholesaling and manufacturing tax rate, which is just under 0.5%. For fruit and vegetable and seafood processors, again, fully exempt now. In 2025, they move to the preferential tax rate, and there is no scheduled expiration date for that preferential rate for those 2 industries. And then for the targeted dairy products sold as ingredients, they received the full exemption beginning in 2013. That exemption will expire June 30th, 2023, and they will move at that time to the regular 0.484% rate for wholesale sales. Next, we'll move on to our analysis of the job and wage impacts in the 3 industries impacted by these preferences. First of all, we'll talk about dairy product processors. We found that beneficiaries of the tax preference employ 94% of industry workers in this particular field. And we also note in the report, we state that from 2015 to 2020, the number of beneficiaries claiming the preference varied from 16 to 44. Dairygold Incorporated was the largest user of these particular tax preferences, and we can name and identify all the businesses that are beneficiaries because these businesses are required to file annual tax performance reports, and that detail is disclosable and is available in appendices in our report. So Dairygold, over the 6 years that we looked at data, claimed 83% of all the dairy beneficiary savings. Jobs for dairy beneficiaries grew from a baseline in 2015 through the end of 2020 by 27%, and that exceeded the growth in the overall food manufacturing classification as well as statewide employment by more than twice and even 3 times more for state employment. When we look at wages paid by dairy beneficiaries, we found that their employee wages increased 63% in that same time period, again surpassing statewide wage increases and wage increases in the overall food manufacturing industry. Next, we'll move to a small discussion of the 2013 targeted dairy product exemption. We did not do a wage and job analysis on this because the detail was, we weren't able to discern that detail, but we will say that this particular tax preference was enacted in 2013, and statements were made that this particular tax preference was enacted to try to encourage a specific type of activity and production facility in Sunnyside, Washington. We spoke with industry representatives when we interviewed folks regarding all of these preferences. They told us that the project that this particular preference was intended to incentivize actually did not occur. We do find, however, that the tax preference has been used to a limited degree. Actual use averages about $62,000 in tax savings each year since 2015. Now we'll move on to fruit and vegetable processors. What we found here is that beneficiaries employ 74% of the industry's overall workforce, and the number of fruit and vegetable beneficiaries has varied from 230 to 329 in the 6 years that we analyzed. A surprising fact was that wineries comprise 71% of the beneficiaries for this preference, but claim just 19% of the tax savings. And that is likely because most Washington wineries are small productions. They don't have a lot of tax liability to make up for tax savings, but there are a number of them. So they encompass a number of the folks claiming this, but not all that much the tax savings. For beneficiary jobs in the fruit and vegetable industry, we found that those grew 23% in the 6-year time period we looked at. Again, at least twice as much as overall food manufacturing, and over 3 times more than statewide employment. And for wages, again, the beneficiary wages for fruit and vegetable also grew at a higher rate than it did for statewide wages and for food manufacturing wages overall. Next, we'll move on to seafood processors. Here we found that beneficiaries employ between 35 to no more than 51% of industry workers. And that is quite a bit lower than the other 2 industries. We were curious as to why that may be the case. It wasn't really clear. We spoke with Employment Security Department regional economists and also the industry representatives that we interviewed for this study to ask them. They suggested a couple of possibilities. First of all, not all Washington seafood processing businesses in the state conduct qualifying activities here. They may be headquartered here, but doing their processing work outside of Washington waters or in Alaska. Another possibility is that the industry does tend to use quite a few self-employed fisher processor businesses. Those businesses would not be included in the employee data. So when we looked at jobs for the seafood beneficiaries, we found that they actually dropped from 2015 to 2020, although not as to the extent that the seafood manufacturing industry, which includes both beneficiaries and non-beneficiaries, did. That drop was even more substantial, and that is compared with gains in statewide employment and food manufacturing in those years. And when we looked at wages, we found that seafood beneficiary wages also decreased 4% at the end of 2020. And that's compared with gains of at least 50% in wages for food manufacturers and statewide employees. Next, I'll hand it over to my colleague Pete for a discussion of the effective tax rate analysis.
Thank you, Dana. For this portion of the analysis, we contracted with a tax accounting consultant to perform a comparative analysis of the impact of taxes that a business faces in Washington and a selection of comparison states. And the comparison states are in the parenthetical there. This analysis found that the business and occupation tax preferences reduce the impact of taxes, but that the effective tax rate remains higher than in comparison. Rather than comparing nominal tax rates across each state, this analysis uses the concept of an effective tax rate. This expresses as a percentage the amount by which multiple taxes might reduce a business's rate of return. The consultant developed a financial profile of a hypothetical small and a hypothetical large firm for each of the three industries, and estimated the rate of return that each firm would generate over a 30-year life cycle. That includes facility construction, and subsequent operation and maintenance. Based on that profile, the consultant estimated the reduction in rate of return due to taxes, including business taxes such as Washington's business and occupation tax, state and local sales taxes, property taxes, and other taxes. The rate of return was first measured without the available tax preferences considered, and again with them included to estimate their effect. And this next slide shows one example of the analysis for the hypothetical small and large fruit and vegetable processing firms. And this shows that the preferences do indeed reduce the effective tax rate for Washington, but that this effective tax rate remains higher than in the other comparison states. And this example is just for fruit and vegetables, but this trend is generally the same for the other industries that were analyzed. But for each scenario, the analysis did note that a significant contributor to Washington's effective tax rate is the sales and use tax, which is assumed to apply to the construction and maintenance of the manufacturing facility that is the basis for each 30-year investment that is modeled. And finally, though the effective tax rate analysis is limited to just comparing taxes, the report and the section of the report on this Ernst & Young analysis also notes that our analysis includes interviews with beneficiary businesses that found that taxes and tax incentives are just one of the many factors that influence a location decision. And other factors that are not included in this effective tax rate analysis are things such as proximity to inputs, labor availability and labor costs, transportation infrastructure, and energy costs and availability. And so these are other factors that might influence a location decision. So this brings us to the first legislative auditor's recommendation, which is that the B&O tax preferences for fruit and vegetable and dairy product processors should be continued and clarified. This because they are meeting the objectives of providing tax relief and creating and retaining industry jobs. But to facilitate future reviews, the legislature should clarify its expectations for the level of job and wage growth, as well as the level of tax relief needed to meet those expectations.
The next legislative auditor recommendation is addressing the B&O tax exemption for sales of dairy products used as ingredients to create other dairy products. And here he recommends that the legislature allow this preference to expire as scheduled July 1st, 2023. We note the activity that the preference was intended to incentivize did not occur. Finally, the last legislative auditor recommendation for this report is for the B&O tax preferences for seafood processors, where the legislative auditor recommends you review and clarify the preferences because they're meeting only one of two objectives. While the preferences are providing tax relief, we found beneficiary jobs in the state have declined and their employee wages have decreased. And it's unclear why more businesses are using this preference or what the legislature's expectations are for the industry's jobs and wages. I'll pause here. If you have any questions for Pete or I, please ask away. And I unfortunately can't see a lot of you, so if I could have help if somebody has a question.
Okay, our first question is from Representative Gaynor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So then when you looked at the preferential rates, I'm curious about the dropping to, I think it was 1.38. And when those projections were made, what was the basis of that? And even the breaks.
Okay.
Senator Saldana, you're not muted.
Sorry, thank you.
Thank you for that question, Representative Gaynor. Currently, all three industries have a full B&O tax exemption, so they don't pay B&O tax for these particular activities. They do pay B&O taxes on other activities they may do, but these particular activities are exempted. The 0.138, the legislature, each time that it has enacted this suite of tax preferences, there has been an exemption followed by a preferential rate in each time. Initially, when these were passed in 2005, then in 2012, you just delayed the expiration dates for these, and again in 2015. So we actually have not seen the preferential rate kick in on these particular activities yet. It's not scheduled to, as I noted, until these exemptions expire July 1st, 2025. We did include both preferences, the exemption and the future preferential rate, in a few of our analyses. When we estimated the beneficiary savings, for example, we did both what it would be, what it is now under the exemption, and what we estimate it would be under the preferential rate. And in our section, I believe 5 or 6 of the report, we did conduct an economic modeling exercise where we went a 30-year time period that included both the exemption and the preferential rate that's scheduled to. So that particular exercise did include both types of tax preference, the exemption and the lower rate.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Please.
So I guess my question though is what is the significance of that preferential rate? How was that established? Are you telling me that's consistent with other instances where there have been preferential rates? And if so, how did you settle on that rate?
Oh, okay. It's statutory. It is in the statute that rate will kick in. We didn't settle on it. It's the law. So that rate will kick in according to the legislature's law that was passed in 2015 when the expiration expires. And that particular 0.138 rate is used for other types of food processors. I believe flour manufacturers, some sort of grain manufacturers, some other food processing type industries do report currently under that preferential rate. So we didn't settle on it, Representative. It is actually in the law. There is a 2-step process to this. We're in the exemption portion now. And if the calendar goes forward and the law is not changed, beginning July 1st, 2025, these 3 industries will move to paying a lower B&O tax rate, but they will pay a rate on these activities. Am I answering, or is it making sense?
I understand you didn't set the rates. I guess I'm just trying to get the background on how those rates are set. And I guess I need to be talking with someone, asking the question to someone else.
Well,
that's
yeah,
I appreciate
I will say that rate is being used, like I said, by other food processors. So I believe they probably settled on that rate because it is used by several other types of food processors, which weren't in this particular analysis that we analyzed, but they do report that same lower rate. So that could be why.
All right, thank you.
And let me just correct me if I'm wrong, but for clarity's sake, Dana, the tax savings or benefits are reported as against the preferential rate, not the rate that would apply for manufacturing generally, right? So it's against.
No, it's actually against and Pete, correct me if I'm wrong, but the preferential rate that we calculated, if this particular exemption went away, they would pay the regular rate because the preferential rate doesn't kick in until 2025. So the taxpayer savings for the exemption are measured against what they would pay under the regular 484% manufacturing or wholesaling B&O tax rate.
Thank you for clarifying that. Are there other questions? Just pausing to see if there are hands up. If there are no other questions, I do a follow-up, which is the analysis does look at effective tax rate in comparison to three other states, but it does not look at the question, correct me if I'm wrong, of whether or not the tax preference is a key factor in location or expansion, given compared to other factors such as proximity to where the fruit or dairy products are grown, raised, or profitability of the industry. So if a frozen French fry manufacturer has revenues of $7 billion, that's not analyzed in this analysis, correct?
We did not look at that as secondary, the profit margin of the businesses. We don't have access to that information. That is their company information, but we did, Representative, interview over 3 dozen industry businesses and beneficiaries of all of these tax preferences and spoke with them. They were very giving of their time and their thoughts and their opinions on this. They did tell us, we asked what are citing decisions that come into play, and they gave us pretty consistently the same kind of information, and it's proximity to the crops, and it is transportation services. And we do note that in the report, as Pete noted, in the section with the Ernst & Young analysis of the effective tax rate. So we did ask, particularly to the people that are using this, what is important when you're looking at citing. And some of these companies are currently determining where they're going to cite new facilities.
Are there any other questions on this preference? Okay, not seeing any other hands up. Let's proceed to, thank you very much, Dana and Pete. Let's proceed with nonprofit hospitals and nonprofit cancer clinics.
Very good. Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Dana Lynn again, reporting on 2 tax preferences that we reviewed that provide property tax exemptions for nonprofit hospitals and nonprofit cancer clinics. The legislative auditor concluded that the property tax exemptions are meeting the inferred intent of encouraging charity care and community benefits. Beneficiaries of these preferences provide 99% of the charity care provided statewide, and the value of that charity care does exceed their tax savings. There are no expiration dates for these particular tax preferences, and we estimate the upcoming biennial savings for these beneficiaries at just under $260 million. The tax preferences we looked at provide exemptions from real property, which are structures and real land, and also for personal property, which includes anything that can be moved and is located in the facility. So hospital equipment, office equipment, beds, medical machinery, all of that is included. And these 2 types of property are exempt from tax under 2 separate laws. There's one law that provides an exemption for private nonprofit and public hospitals, and that has been around since prior to statehood. And another exemption was enacted in 1997, and that is for nonprofit cancer clinics that are affiliated with a nonprofit hospital. These tax preferences did not have stated intents, but we did infer that the objective for them was to support provision of charity care to Washingtonians and community benefits provided to the communities where these hospitals are located. What we found is that the nonprofit hospitals and cancer clinics are providing 3 times the charity care that they received in tax savings, and they are meeting the inferred intent. By charity care, we mean medical care for which payment isn't expected and the patient isn't billed. And the term community benefits is one that is used by the IRS in tax reporting and hospital data collection. And it includes, among other things, providing unreimbursed medical care under programs and certain eligibility requirements, such as Medicare, and services to the community, such as providing education services or research programs. In 2019, which is the most recent year where there was complete data, we found that beneficiary hospitals provided 99% of all the charity care that was provided in the state. Those 94 beneficiary hospitals in fiscal year 19 saved over $93 million in property taxes they would have otherwise paid. And they provided over $336 million by our estimate of charity care to Washingtonians. The legislative auditor recommends that you clarify the objectives of these preferences and notes that if the tax preferences are intended to support certain outcomes, the legislature should clarify its expectations by adding performance statements that clearly state the public policy objectives and metrics to determine if those objectives are being met. And I will pause here for any questions you all might have.
I'm not seeing any hands up for this recommendation. Okay. Wonderful. Let's proceed from nonprofit hospitals to historic automobile museums.
Hey, good morning again, Chair Paulette, members of the committee. My name is Zach Freeman, staff to JLARC, and I'll be presenting our preliminary review of a sales and use tax deferral for historic automobile museums. The deferral closed to new applicants on December 31st, 2008. An estimated beneficiary savings over the length of the deferral and repayment period were $466,000. The LeMay America's Car Museum in Tacoma is the sole beneficiary. The legislative auditor concludes that the tax deferral meets the public policy objective of improving the fiscal stability of its one beneficiary. This may have improved economic vitality, but other local financial incentives likely had a larger influence. The preference was established in 2005, and the museum was approved for the deferral in 2008. Museum construction was completed in 2012, triggering the start of what was then a 5-year deferral period. However, the 2017 legislature extended the preference, creating the 10-year deferral period shown here. Starting this December, the museum must repay deferred taxes in equal annual payments over the next 10 years. The 2017 legislature also added a performance statement stating the objective of the preference is to increase the fiscal stability of the museum, thereby strengthening local economic vitality. JLARC staff found that the deferral meets the first objective by acting as an interest-free loan for the museum. The museum deferred $1.99 million in sales and use tax, and according to museum representatives, the deferral allowed the museum to build up financial reserves to pay off construction debt and to withstand prolonged closures during the COVID-19 pandemic. JLARC staff calculated estimated beneficiary savings of $466,000 by comparing the deferral to a hypothetical situation in which the museum took out a loan for the sales and use tax amount. JLARC staff estimated the impact of the museum on the local economy using economic modeling software. The analysis compares the current economic baseline with a hypothetical scenario in which the museum does not operate. In Pierce County, we found the museum supports an estimated 78 jobs and contributes $8.1 million to the economy per year. The museum has also had a positive impact outside of Pierce County, as shown here. This analysis, however, is specific to the museum and it does not isolate the impact of the deferral itself. The impact of the deferral depends on the extent to which it contributed to the museum's construction and ongoing operation. We found the museum benefited from other public financial support, financial public support other than the tax deferral. The city of Tacoma, for example, donated $17 million in land adjacent to the Tacoma Dome. And this additional financial support is more than 36 times the estimated beneficiary savings of $466,000 and likely contributed more to the museum's construction and operation in Pierce County. And as a result, we found the impact of the deferral on local economic vitality is likely limited. The legislative auditor recommends the legislature continue the deferral until it is repaid in 2032. After that, the preference will no longer be necessary in statute. So that concludes our prepared remarks for this report. I'll just kind of go through our next steps here and I'm happy to answer any other questions. So we'll present to the Citizen Commission in August and be back in front of you at the end of November to present our proposed final reports. The full tax reports, along with videos and one-pagers and other interactive data, can be found on our website linked here. The full tax team contact information is here. And again, happy to answer any questions about the Auto Museum report.
And are there any questions? I will send out notice, but a reminder that for some of our questions today and past about views from impacted tax beneficiaries and other entities, stakeholders impacted, it's very educational to participate in the Citizens Commission meeting and as an observer, and to be able to hear those questions and or comments from beneficiaries and other stakeholders. With that, if there are no other questions about the tax preference reviews, we will move to the final item on our agenda, which is the review of implementation of performance audits done by the state auditor and presented to JLARC under I-900. Ashley, once again.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I am still Ashley Elliott, and I'm here to present the implementation of the state auditor I-900 recommendations to the legislature. And this is, unlike the tax reports you just saw, not an audit or an evaluation. It is simply like an overview of some of the work that the state auditor's office has done under I-900. In 2005, Initiative 900 authorized the State Auditor's Office to conduct performance audits. When the State Auditor's Office makes a recommendation to the legislature, I-900 requires JLARC staff to report on the implementation status of those recommendations every July. We track recommendations in reports over the previous 4 years, and once they are implemented, we no longer track them. Detailed information about these recommendations that were open last year can be found in the report that was issued on July 1st. And I'm going to go over the status of the 7 state auditor recommendations to the legislature that were open and in our report over the last 4 years. There are 4, of those 7 recommendations that were outstanding over the last 4 years, 4 were new in 2021 and 3 were remaining from the previous years. So 1 was adopted as presented in the audit. 3 were partially implemented. 2 had some legislative activity related to the topic, such as discussions at work sessions, or we couldn't find any information, there were no bills introduced. And 1 was addressed in another way, for a total of 7. There were 5 reports that the state auditor issued in the last 4 years that had recommendations to the legislature that were covered in our report. These are those 5 reports. And these were the other 16 that recommendations that the state auditor issued that were already resolved that are not covered in our report this year. This is done every year under Initiative 900. So back next year to also review the status of those, any remaining outstanding recommendations or new recommendations, and I'm happy to answer any questions. There's also a representative from the state auditor's office here if you have any questions for them.
Would our auditor's office rep Jake, like to say anything? Also, I'm curious as to if you want to say anything in particular about the, although it's more than a year, but the implementation effect hasn't been seen, was seen this year, Justin, on the recommendations about special purpose districts and their lack of audibility. If you want to say anything about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Ashley covered it nicely, kind of in summary form. As you know, Mr. Chair, maybe other members of JLARC, I am relatively new to the state auditor's office, so this is my 7th month now in total. Moved up from Kansas, so I'm not intimately familiar with necessarily all of our work, but I will look into that special district's question about the auditability and see if we have any updates for you, Mr. Chair, and I will get that information to Keenan and his group if there is something.
Any other questions for Ashley or Justin? I will say that I know the state auditor has put out some updates, and the performance audit, and is wearing my hat as local government chair and Rep. Gaynor as ranking member, and Senator Short as work on committee in the Senate. The auditors work on the lack of audibility of over 100 special purpose districts has really changed and is now, I think, essentially eliminated all those districts who previously had failed to be auditable and had failed to be reporting their finances to the state. And it's quite a turnaround in terms of accountability. And I really appreciate the work of the state auditor on this. Any other comments or questions? Let's open it up for any good of the order, including any further thoughts or questions about the process we'll be using for recruiting and hiring a new legislative auditor. Not seeing any hands up. In that case, I want to encourage you to please feel free to communicate with the executive committee on your thoughts about the hiring process for a new auditor. We will be sharing how we weight criteria with you as we go into the process and updating you on the timeline, and look forward to any input that anyone has. And of course, as we've expressed our deep gratitude for Keenan's work, it's also deep gratitude for his willingness to assist us in hiring for this. Keenan is not just retiring and walking away, and he is helping us tremendously to make sure that we have continuity and this state is well served. So with that, I will conclude the meeting, and our next meeting, Keenan, is someone.
Our next regular meeting will be September 19th. So we're going to respect the tradition of giving all of you a break in August from committee meetings, but we'll be back then. In the morning, we'll have a regular committee meeting, and we'll be covering 2 reports, one on Medicaid fraud, key TAM provisions, and that's a provision in the False Claims Act in state law that allows third parties to bring forward Medicaid fraud allegations for investigation by the Attorney General's office. And then we will also be having a report on some behavioral health consultation and referral lines that are operated by the University of Washington and Seattle Children's Hospital that are funded by the state. And in the afternoon, we'll be having an I-900 hearing as well.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your summer, and we'll see you in September, but feel free to reach out to the executive committee in the meantime. Take care.